Afternoon, everybody. Now, in coming back toward the end of the Battle of Chicamauga, as was mentioned before, after Longstreet's strong attack, the Union collapsed pretty much, and they began retreating back toward the city of Chattanooga. And people were pressuring General Bragg, the Confederate commander, saying, "Let's go after him. Why don't we pursue him?" And Bragg took a similar approach in some ways to the position that General Meade took after Gettysburg, in that he had just lost over 18,000 men, and plus also, for somehow, because of the way the lines were so close between the Union and the Confederate troops, that majority of the horses that were to pull his artillery pieces were shot as well. So he said, "I don't have enough men, and I don't have horses to pull my guns. How can I actually do a pursuit?" That was Bragg's reasoning. So he chose to stand back. Meanwhile, Longstreet and Polk and Hill and all the others were saying, "We need to go after him. We got him on the run. We have a perfect opportunity to sweep him out of Tennessee." And Bragg chose not to. But instead he allowed General Rosecrans to fall back with the Union Army back into the fortification, the defenses of Chattanooga. And he laid in for a siege. And it was actually working well for the Confederates at one point, because they cut off all those side roads and all the roads to Chattanooga, except for one tiny little route that was up to the mountains to get into Chattanooga. So in a lot of ways, Rosecrans' army was starving. And so the siege was starting to have an effect. And so, because Rosecrans had probably lost the spirit of fighting in that. And so President Lincoln decided to pull the inactive Ulysses Grant from the Vicksburg area to come up and take over overall command of that area. And so he took over the area of Chattanooga and took over that whole area. And he wound up eventually, to make sum up a long story short, they wound up putting his old friend General William Tecumseh Sherman in charge of that particular area, and they wound up pushing the attack against the Confederates to break the siege. Now, around the town of Chattanooga, there's a mountain of considerable size. It's called Lookout Mountain. I've been up there. It's a pretty high mountain, and just you can see for miles. The Confederates actually held the overlook of that mountain, and it was very hard to get up there. And they decided that General Grant was out of the attitude, we need to take that hill and that mountain in order for us to take the advantage back and to break this siege. And so he had the army going up there and attacking the area of Lookout Mountain in November of 1863. And because of the angle of the hill, the Union artillery pieces shooting up couldn't reach a lot of the Confederate positions, and the Confederate guys were laughing, saying, "Aim the guns a little higher." And it was called the Battle in the Clouds, because it was so high up. and because of the angle of the hill, also when the Union troops were coming upwards, the Confederate position had to put their guns in such a way so they could shoot down, but because of the angle, the cannonballs and the Confederate pieces were actually rolling out of the guns. That is such a major angle that the Union troops were coming up and the Confederates were shooting down. So based on that, Confederate artillery was all but neutralized on this. And so they hit the area of Lookout Mountain with superior forces, and they wound up pushing the Confederates out of there, which was a big shock to everyone, because they thought the area was all but impregnable. An interesting point was there was a gentleman who was actually carrying the colors for a Wisconsin regiment, who actually put his Union flag up on the top of Lookout Mountain by the last name of MacArthur. That man would be the father of General Douglas MacArthur of World War II. So there's some interesting facts of just how close those situations were related to. Now, Bragg, he was already out of favor with his men. He did not have the confidence of his men, and a Confederate soldier by the name of Sam Watkins said that he always broke morale. Bragg never did not care for his men, did not care for feeding his men. Everything was in bad shape. And it went so far as General Longstreet, General Polk, and General Hill, he actually demoted General Hill for speaking out against him. And so they actually petitioned President Davis to remove Braxton Bragg from command. And the main reason why he was still there is because of the friendship of him and Davis. And so Bragg went so far as to blame everyone but himself for the debacle at Lookout Mountain. He had none of the fault was his. Everyone's fault was everyone else's fault for all the problems. Took the exact opposite approach that General Lee took after Gettysburg. General Lee, he took full responsibility for everything that went wrong at Gettysburg, where Bragg, after Lookout Mountain, took none of the responsibility and blamed everyone else. So with that, General Bragg was eventually relieved of command by President Davis, he saw he really had no other option because he'd lost the confidence of his men completely by his not seizing initiative and not taking responsibility when it needed to be taken. So Braxton Bragg was relieved of command in November of 1863, and he was replaced by Joseph E. Johnston. And Bragg was actually went on to Richmond, where he would serve as an advisor to President Davis for the remainder of the war. So there you go.